Hello there, people. One of my favorite genres, namely survival horror, has evolved dramatically over the last 3 decades, shifting from fixed camera angles and limited resources to fully immersive worlds built on tension, atmosphere, and player vulnerability. In this video, we rank the top 20 survival horror games of all time, using the same methodology that I've adopted on my previous video, designed to minimize personal bias and highlight long-term consensus. Check it out if you haven't watched it yet. This list is based on action horror and survival horror games, to be clear. I've decided to include action horrors as well, otherwise the list would be shorter, and I would be forced to exclude milestones of the genre such as Resident Evil 4, for example. But make no mistake, I understand clearly the difference between a pure survival horror game and an action horror with survival elements. For each title, the highest rated version or platform is used, and in the event of a tie, the game with the larger total number of reviews is ranked higher, just like the previous video. This approach prioritizes not just critical acclaim, but also player engagement, longevity, and influence within the survival horror genre. Each entry includes a focused analysis of what made the game stand out, whether through atmosphere, mechanics, sound design, or psychological impact, highlighting how these titles defined, refined, or reinvented survival horror. I would also like to add that the decision to do this video is not only because survival horror is one of my favorite genres, but also because 2025 was a great year for gaming, generally speaking, but especially for the survival horror genre, which in my opinion deserves special attention. With that out of the way, let's begin. Silent Hill 4 took the series in a riskier direction, shifting focus from fog-filled streets to psychological confinement and vulnerability. Its central mechanic, the haunted apartment, turned a safe space into a source of dread, reinforcing constant tension rather than momentary scares. By introducing limited inventory, escort-based survival pressure, and invincible enemies, the game emphasized endurance over empowerment. While divisive at launch, Silent Hill 4 expanded the genre's psychological boundaries and remains one of the series' most unsettling and experimental entries. Tormented Souls is a deliberate revival of classic survival horror, drawing heavily from early Resident Evil and Silent Hill design principles. Fixed camera angles, limited resources, and puzzle-driven progression place constant pressure on the player's decision-making. Combat is intentionally clunky, reinforcing vulnerability rather than empowerment, while inventory management and environmental puzzles demand careful planning. By modernizing classic mechanics without diluting their tension, Tormented Souls proves that traditional survival horror design can still be effective in a contemporary context. Chronos. The New Dawn builds its horror around time distortion and environmental decay, using shifting timelines to constantly reframe familiar spaces. Enemies evolve and reposition as time changes, forcing players to adapt rather than rely on memorization. Survival tension comes from deliberate pacing, limited resources, and encounters that punish aggression over caution. Instead of relying on jump scares, Chronos emphasizes unease through world instability and mechanical unpredictability, positioning itself as a modern survival horror experience grounded in systemic pressure rather than spectacle. Fatal Frame 2 centers its survival horror around vulnerability, forcing players to confront threats directly through the camera obscura rather than avoiding them. Combat requires precise timing and proximity, making every encounter a calculated risk instead of a power fantasy. Resource management plays a critical role, with limited film types and healing items encouraging restraint and strategic planning. Combined with its oppressive rural setting and tragic twin-focused narrative, Fatal Frame 2 delivers a uniquely intimate form of survival horror built on tension, patience, and psychological unease. I'm really looking forward to the upcoming remake. Will it match the quality of the original game? Write your opinion in the commentaries and subscribe if you're liking the video so far. Resident Evil 7 brought the series back to survival horror by prioritizing vulnerability through first-person perspective and limited resources. Ammo scarcity, crafting decisions, and unpredictable enemies force players to approach every encounter cautiously. The Baker Estate functions as a hostile, interconnected space where tension is sustained through sound design and environmental storytelling, successfully re-establishing Resident Evil's horror-focused identity. Silent Hill 3 blends psychological survival horror with a more direct narrative,
following Heather Mason as she's pulled into the town's cult-driven legacy. Limited ammo, scarce healing items, and deliberately vulnerable combat maintain constant tension, discouraging reckless engagement. Its hostile environments, from abandoned malls to industrial corridors, are designed to disorient and pressure the player, reinforced by unsettling sound design. By combining explicit storytelling with systemic survival mechanics, Silent Hill 3 refines the series' formula while preserving the oppressive atmosphere that defines classic survival horror.
The original Resident Evil defined modern survival horror, combining resource scarcity, limited inventory, and fixed camera tension to constantly keep players on edge. Every encounter with zombies and creatures is a decision: fight, flee, or conserve ammo, reinforcing vulnerability and planning. Its mansion setting doubles as a puzzle, where exploration and backtracking create pressure while secrets and traps heighten fear. By blending atmospheric storytelling, tight level design, and punishing mechanics, Resident Evil established the blueprint for systemic survival horror that still influences the genre today. Are you up for a Jill sandwich? The Dead Space remake revitalizes sci-fi survival horror by combining zero-gravity navigation, resource scarcity, and brutal enemy design to keep players constantly on edge. Combat emphasizes strategic dismemberment, making every encounter a test of planning and precision rather than raw firepower. Environmental storytelling, claustrophobic corridors, and audio cues heighten tension, while limited ammo and health force careful management. By modernizing visuals and controls without diluting systemic pressure, the remake preserves the franchise's core survival horror identity, delivering a relentless and immersive space horror experience. It is by far one of my favorite horror games ever. The original Silent Hill defined psychological survival horror, blending limited combat, scarce resources, and oppressive environments to constantly reinforce vulnerability. Its fog-shrouded town and labyrinthine interiors create disorientation, making every step feel tense and uncertain. Enemies are both unpredictable and symbolic, encouraging cautious exploration over direct confrontation. Coupled with unsettling sound design and cryptic storytelling, Silent Hill transforms atmosphere into a systemic threat, delivering a survival horror experience that relies on player tension and resource management rather than pure action. The first time that I played this game, I noticed it was different from other horror games, and I could feel right away its disturbing aura, a feeling that no other horror franchise can give. A masterpiece.
The original Dead Space is a masterclass in sci-fi survival horror, forcing players to manage limited ammo, health, and inventory while facing the relentless necromorphs. Claustrophobic ship corridors, zero-gravity hazards, and reactive enemies create constant tension, making every decision matter. By blending strategic combat, environmental storytelling, and systemic fear, Dead Space delivers a tense, immersive experience where vulnerability is the core of the horror.
Dead Space 2 builds on the original by combining intense zero-gravity combat with tighter pacing and more dynamic environments. Players remain vulnerable throughout, managing limited ammo, health, and weapon upgrades while facing increasingly aggressive necromorph encounters. The game heightens tension with claustrophobic ship sections, sudden enemy emergence, and systemic hazards that demand careful movement and timing. By refining the balance between action and survival mechanics, Dead Space 2 keeps fear rooted in player decision-making and resource management, solidifying its status as a modern survival horror classic. Resident Evil Code. Veronica expanded the series' survival horror formula with a larger, more intricate environment spread across multiple locations, including Rockford Island and a massive research facility. Players must manage limited ammo, healing items, and inventory space while navigating complex puzzles and backtracking, reinforcing constant tension. The game introduces more aggressive enemy AI and environmental hazards, forcing strategic planning rather than brute force. With its cinematic presentation, atmospheric music, and systemic survival pressure, Code, Veronica remains a standout entry that balances action elements with classic vulnerability, keeping the player on edge throughout. It is considered one of the hardest games of the Resident Evil series, and I can assure you that having played it and was forced to restart my campaign due to bad resource management. Silent Hill 2 Remake revitalizes one of the most influential psychological survival horrors by preserving the original's oppressive atmosphere while upgrading environmental detail and sound design. Players navigate a town shaped by personal guilt and dread, where limited resources and vulnerable combat consistently reinforce tension rather than empowerment. The remake's enhanced creature design and spatial storytelling deepen the sense of unease, while exploration remains a careful balance between curiosity and survival risk. By grounding its horror and emotional themes in systemic pressure, Silent Hill 2 Remake demonstrates how survival horror can be both psychological and mechanically demanding. Silent Hill 2 is a masterpiece of a remake, and it shows every developer how exactly a good remake should be done. If you haven't played it yet, just do it. You will not regret. Eternal Darkness stands out in survival horror by blending traditional combat and resource management with its groundbreaking sanity system, which directly affects player perception and gameplay. Limited health, scarce healing items, and varied enemies create constant tension, while sanity effects, ranging from subtle visual distortions to outright game-breaking tricks, keep players psychologically unsettled. Set across multiple timelines, the game emphasizes exploration, puzzle solving, and careful planning, rewarding cautious and strategic play. By merging systemic survival mechanics with psychological manipulation, Eternal Darkness delivers a unique horror experience that challenges both player skill and perception. Resident Evil 3 amps up survival horror with constant pressure from the Nemesis, a relentless pursuer who forces players to make strategic decisions under threat. Limited ammo, healing resources, and inventory space heighten tension, turning routine encounters into meaningful choices. The city of Raccoon becomes a sandbox of survival, with backtracking, hazards, and enemy placement reinforcing vulnerability. By balancing systemic survival mechanics with high-stakes action, RE3 maintains fear through resource management and player decision-making, solidifying its place as a classic tension-driven survival horror experience. The Resident Evil remake modernized the 1996 classic by updating visuals, lighting, and enemy behavior, while preserving resource scarcity, limited inventory, and tense fixed-camera encounters. Players are constantly forced to weigh risk versus reward, deciding when to fight, flee, or conserve ammo. Puzzles and exploration remain central, reinforcing survival pressure as backtracking and item management create strategic tension. By enhancing atmospheric detail without diluting systemic survival mechanics, the remake demonstrates how classic survival horror design can be both faithful and immersive for new audiences. Resident Evil 2 Remake revitalizes the original's survival horror with modern graphics, fluid controls, and atmospheric detail while retaining its core tension. Limited ammo, scarce healing items, and inventory management force players to carefully plan encounters with zombies and relentless hunters. The Raccoon City Police Department is designed to encourage exploration under constant threat, with environmental storytelling and jump scares reinforcing vulnerability. By balancing cinematic presentation with systemic survival mechanics, RE2 Remake delivers both a faithful homage and a modern benchmark in survival horror. Silent Hill 2 is widely regarded as the definitive psychological survival horror experience, combining deliberate pacing, limited combat, and scarce resources to maintain constant vulnerability. Players control James Sunderland, drawn to the fog-covered town by a letter from his deceased wife, a premise that immediately frames the story around guilt, grief, and denial. Enemies and environments are symbolic rather than purely hostile, forcing players to engage cautiously and interpret threats beyond surface-level danger. Exploration and puzzle solving create sustained tension, while Akira Yamaoka's sound design amplifies unease through silence as much as noise. The game's lasting legacy lies in its narrative ambition. Silent Hill 2 redefined how horror could explore human psychology, influencing decades of games and earning an enduring place in the genre's cultural canon. Resident Evil 4 Remake refines a genre-defining classic by restoring survival horror tension through stricter resource management and more reactive enemy behavior. Limited ammo, scarce healing items, and rebalanced combat force players to prioritize positioning and decision-making over constant aggression. The darker tone and improved environmental design enhance immersion, while modernized mechanics preserve the game's original pacing and structure. By balancing action with systemic survival pressure, the remake successfully modernizes a landmark title without sacrificing the core principles that made Resident Evil 4 so influential. Resident Evil 4 on GameCube revolutionized survival horror by blending tense resource management with action-oriented combat while keeping player vulnerability and systemic survival pressure at the core. Leon Kennedy navigates rural villages and fortified compounds overrun by the parasitic Los Ganados, where limited ammo, scarce healing items, and inventory constraints force careful planning and strategic engagement. The GameCube version's controls, pacing, and camera work created a sense of immediacy and threat, balancing high-stakes action with the anxiety of scarce resources. Environmental storytelling, atmospheric sound design, and adaptive enemy behavior reinforce tension throughout. Its influence is monumental, shaping the future of third-person survival horror and inspiring countless games, while still standing as a genre-defining masterpiece for its design, narrative, and systemic fear.
That's it for our ranking of the top survival horror games of the last 30 years. From Silent Hill to Resident Evil, these titles show the best the genre has to offer. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into gaming history. I want to hear from you. What are your favorite survival horror games, or which ones do you think we missed? Drop a comment below, I read them all. Thanks for watching, and remember, in survival horror, every decision counts.